to Israel and Palestine that I went on last year was the chairman of the Political Science Department, Sean Duffy, and my director of programs, Aaron Peck. Is Aaron here? Here. There you are. Aaron is over there, and Sean's over there. And during the course of our visit, we were privileged to meet Dr. Tamar Hermann in the course of our exploring ideas about how the Schweitzer Institute might be able to do some work in the Middle East. So without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Annette Politsky to present our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks. It's good to see you all here. I'm not a historian, but those of us who were at the age of reason in 1967, I guess most of you, or some of you were not even born then, but some of us were just reaching the age of reason, and some of us were probably beyond it already. We remember 67 as an important point when the Israeli occupation of Palestine began. But when we talk about the peace movement in Israel, not for some reason, for a very obvious reason, we think of 1978. Now, it's not that people weren't talking about peace, demonstrating concerning peace, but in 78, 348 officers and soldiers wrote a letter to Prime Minister Begin telling him that he mustn't lose the opportunity of making peace with Egypt at that point. And that letter started a movement which very soon became known as Peace Now. And Peace Now is the movement that is usually touted, not by everybody, but by most people, as the icon of the Israeli peace movement. In the summer of 1978, just before Begin went to Camp David, this was Camp David 1, we had a big demonstration. I don't know the numbers, but it was the biggest demonstration that I had ever encountered, telling Begin to make peace. In other words, we sent him off with roses to Camp David to make peace with Egypt. That was 1978. By 1982, we had gotten to the point where we had, again, this is mythology, but where we had 400,000 people demonstrating against the atrocities that had happened in Sabra and Shatila, which was the first Lebanon war. And those of you who don't know all these details can go look it up. But basically, this was a peace movement. You figure 400,000 people in the city square, whether that's true or whether it's only 60,000. I say 60,000 because I once measured the area, and I figured if there's 4 people to a yard, you get to 60,000. But if we were crowded, we were 400,000. 400,000 people makes a peace movement. That means something. And that peace movement, Peace Now itself, but the whole peace camp continued to work from 78 onwards, through the 80s, through the 90s. Between 80s and 90s, there's a 4 or 5 year period there that we call the First Intifada. And then we got to the 2000s. If you look at the Israeli newspapers in the past 2 months, you will find at least 5 articles. There's much more, but I've noted 5 articles talking about the death of the peace movement. Sometimes it's not formulated as death of the peace movement. Sometimes it's formulated as the end of the left. And the question whether left and peace movement is the same thing is a nice conceptual question that some of you have obviously encountered before. But basically, those of us who are now way past the age of reason have now come to the age of despair, because there is a consensus, some sort of consensus, saying that the peace movement or the peace camp in Israel is dead. Now, that's consensus, and consensus should be questioned and criticized. Is it really dead? If it's not, why are we saying that it's dead? If it is, who shot it? Now, Tamar Hermann, who's with us here, has just put out a book called The Israeli Peace Movement, A Shattered Dream. And we look to her to tell us the story of the demise, if it is a demise, of the peace camp and the peace movement in Israel. But way before this book, Tamar is one of Israel's leading thinkers in anything that has to do with public opinion, political movement, even policy making, security or security perceptions in the Israeli public. We're looking at is really both a history and a deep analysis of Israeli politics from very early on. Well, it depends how early and how old we want to say we are, but basically from the occupation onwards and other specific points, of course. Beyond the academics, though, and this is what is so important to me, beyond the academics, she is a voice that is heard because she's Israel's leading pollster. She does the polls. And she is the one who not only gives us the data, but has the sense to ask the right questions, and more than that, to analyze the answers. It's no big thing to get the data. And some of you, I know some of you have worked in the polling institute here, and you know what it's like to just sit there and make the phone calls. But there's somebody who formulates the questions, and again, as I said, more important, someone who analyzes the answers. We look to Tamar to tell us what Israelis are thinking, what we are thinking. We look to her to explain to us how near or how far we are from peace. And I think that's a terrible responsibility. I hate to put it on you like that, but I think that's an amazing onus to lay on someone, to explain to us why it is that we are where we are in the sense of what we think and how we view ourselves, the other side, and any sort of thought or, as she says here, dream of peace. So I'm very proud and very happy and very, let me say, more, no, well, do we want to say excited when we talk about war and peace? Yes, very excited to have us here, someone who is systematic, nuanced, but mostly what we look for in the academy, surprising. Because what we hear from this kind of analysis is something that we haven't thought of before or we haven't heard of before. So I really am very, very happy to have Tamar Hermann with us.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sean. I'm really very pleased to be here with you tonight. And it's a very big question, the question that Anna has just put forward. I'll try to answer it indirectly because I tried to answer it more directly during our afternoon session at the political science department when I talked specifically about public opinion. Here I'll try to figure out what is going on in Israel through the perspective of the peace movement. By the way, there are chairs here available in case that you want to sit instead of standing. It will be boring enough for you to sit. And my love affair with the peace movement started years ago when I started to write my dissertation. And the question which puzzled me at that time as a student for political science was how comes that in a country which has always been troubled by the issue of war, less troubled by the issue of peace at that time. How comes that we didn't have any pacifist movement? I mean, throughout the years, there was no pacifist movement in Israel. And later on, I made the question a bit easier by asking about the peace movement. When I submitted my proposal for the dissertation in the late 80s to the university authorities, it was approved by, there was someone there who said, why do you think that it's important at all to deal with the peace movement, in particular, and in general, with the social movement? Because mainstream political science at that time, actually in many universities to this very point, did not deal with civil society activities. It was thought of as redundant, irrelevant, something which is whimsical, something which is just gone with the wind, starts and disappears. And they said, maybe you'll write some political biography of someone. Why would you deal with these issues? And timing is everything in life, because I have submitted my dissertation very close to the eruption of the first Intifada, and then people started to understand the power of people who are getting engaged in politics in general. Of course, it was more on the Palestinian side, but there was some extensive activities, peace activities on the Israeli side as well. So ever since then, I've been following the peace movement, and I'll try to explain to you here what is the meaning of the term peace movement in Israel, because it is not something which is very tangible. I'll try to explain the complexity of the very term, and certainly of the subject. But again, timing is everything, and I'll start with something that has happened about 10 days ago in Israel, and is very relevant to our discussion here. About 10 days ago, a report was published in Israel, a report which was written by two NGOs, both of them affiliated with the political right. One of them is headed by a political science professor from Bar-Ilan University, and his organization is called the NGO Monitor. What they actually do, they are monitoring the activities of civil groups and civil organizations. I can assure you that they are not following the organizations on the right side of the political spectrum. Although the title is like monitoring the NGO arena, they're always watching and also always focusing only on the organizations of the left, the peace movement, the various peace organizations, and the human rights organizations. The other organization that took part in this research effort is called the Institute for Zionist Strategy. And he is, and the person that heads this organization is a journalist who is also a settler. So by his definition, I mean, by his political definition, you can understand that he is not very supportive of the left and the peace movement, because actually the first demand of the peace movement is that Israel would pull out of the territories, and this guy lives in the territories. So you can see immediately the personal side to it. In this report, which was, I mean, it looked very academic, and this is something which is very dangerous, because sometimes you read reports which look absolutely professional, and without knowing the background of the people who are in charge, or the selection that they do in the cases which they examine, you can get the false impression that it's a serious piece of work. In this case, it's a total farce in a way. Their bottom line was that the various peace movements and peace groups and the human rights organizations, including B'Tselem, who Anat knows very well and closely, they enjoy the financial support of EU bodies and EU programs and European governments and European official bodies. Their argument was that by supporting those organizations, European governments are actually intervening with the domestic politics in Israel, thereby impairing its sovereignty, actually. They say that what they're doing is they are trying to pull the rug from under the feet of the Israeli government while negotiating with the Palestinians by supporting these organizations as if the opposition that these organizations put forward is not authentic. They are being paid to do that by some external bodies with foreign interests. And they actually do what should not be done by other governments. When these people were presented with the question, okay, so if we are being financed by external body, so are the NGOs of the right. And their argument was, and this was very difficult to deal with, on the formal level, they said that the organizations of the right got donations and funding only from private donors. And they actually made the point that there is a huge difference between someone who is just writing a check for a right-wing organization that is constructing a new settlement and a European government which is actually transferring money into Israel in order for these people to challenge the authorities. The matter was brought to the attention of several members of Knesset, members of parliament, and last week they had a discussion or a debate over the question of financing of Israeli NGOs, and one member of Knesset even said that they are going to try and have a law that would prohibit Israeli organizations from getting governmental money from the outside. This attack on the peace movement and peace activism and human rights activism in Israel is just the last link in a very long chain of attacks on these organizations. And the question is, if the peace movement is really dead, why would anybody deal with it? And my answer to that, and this would be, actually, I'm telling you the end of the story in a way, that although organizationally one may make the argument that it is dead or at least hibernating or maybe comatose in a way, its influence over the public discourse in Israel about issues related with peace and war, about occupation, about human rights, about civil rights, is or has been immense. And the people on the other side actually recognize that its strength does not lie with its institutional power. That the fact that all organizations are almost, all of them are actually defunct, or many are defunct, this doesn't change the fact that there are some very strong voices by people who are highly appreciated, even if resented within Israel, that make the discourse looks different and sounds different, and therefore they are spending all these energies in order to block the movement from getting funding and destroying its image, actually. This is an act not only of just stopping the financing, but actually ruining its image. And the fact that they feel that it does have an influence, this is why they bother to do that. But in order for you just to get the feeling of what is happening there, the peace movement has been attacked from all over. And I'll give you some, I'll bring some citations here in order to give you the gist of what kind of criticism has it experienced throughout the years? For example, a very classical argument made by a person of the right wing, he said, there is no difference between the peace activists who are defending the murderers and the murderers themselves. This was taken from a talkback on the internet by a person who is actually saying the peace movement is supporting Arab terrorism, and therefore if the terrorists are killing Israelis, this means that the peace activists are actually to be blamed for the blood shed. Someone else who is now, used to be a journalist, now he's a member of Knesset of the a right-wing Orthodox party. His name is Uri Orbach. He said, contrary to what the leftists argue, the price of being one is actually nil. It is even beneficial. You show the entire world that you are not narrow-minded or self-centered. The preaching and nonsense of the left can be found even in the food columns in the newspapers. Defeatist remarks appear in the transportation section, in the by-the-way comments of sport journalists, and of course, more openly in the lectures of many university professors. And this refers to you and me. After all, that's today bon ton. He actually tries to make a statement about the inculcation of the peace advocacy into places where it should not be. And indeed, in certain cases, when you read the food columns or the transportation columns in the newspapers, you can find some references. But I can show you many more examples of such references in like the sports columns in reference to the right-wing ideas of what's right and what's wrong, because journalists are part of the political debate. I also must tell you that it depends on the faculty as far as the universities are concerned, because some things which may resonate with leftism are often being said in the liberal arts and the humanities, but totally different things are being said at the School of Engineering and the exact sciences and life sciences. There, most of the professors would not be that pro-peace activism. There are also the critics who are actually used to be on the left, but got disappointed because of the failure of the peace movement. One of whom is a person who is well known as a PR person, and he says, facts seem to have no impact on the left. This is the left that doesn't know when to stop and ask itself questions, or to reflect whether perhaps what it said yesterday is no longer correct today. A meeting with them leaves one with the impression that the same faulty diskette had been implanted in their brains. Like they're saying again and again things which are incorrect. Basically, he agreed with this agenda, but later on he found it disappointing, so he said the others who are still there are probably just repeating something which was implanted in their minds. But the criticism also came from the radical left, because the radical left is also very, very critical of the mainstream peace movement. And here we find things like, no, there is no peace movement in Israel, and unfortunately, until you end occupation and civil society develops in Israel and is liberated of its Zionist ideology, only then we will have a chance of reconciliation, and so on and so forth. So actually, there is no one who says anything good about the peace movement, from the far right to the far left, throughout the political map. The only people who say nice things about the peace movement are the peace movement members themselves. But this doesn't mean anything. I mean, the fact that everyone is trying to discredit the peace movement only means that it is of importance, because otherwise they would have ignored it all together. So I'll try and figure out, why does the peace movement create such resentment on the public level, certainly on the level of the decision makers? Does it say something about its ability to make a difference? And I can give you, in general, 3 answers that the book deals with, of course, in much greater depth. The first answer is the basic, I would say, friction between the agenda of the peace movement and some major pillars of the mainstream narrative of Israel regarding the causes of the conflict, the way that it developed, who is to blame for the course that this historical development took. And mainly the question is, what is the best guarantee for the future existence of Israel? Whereas the mainstream would argue that what we should invest in is maintaining the military superiority of Israel and having the best army in the Middle East, and that political agreements and arrangements would come only from a position of superiority, of military superiority. The peace movement is not, of course, supportive of this interpretation. They would not see the conflict as necessarily a zero-sum game. They would not put the entire blame on the Arab side. They would also criticize the Zionist project by, for example, arguing that at least in certain respects it is a colonialist endeavor, which is something that most Israelis would hate to hear. And this would immediately boomerang on the level of the image of the peace movement. So there are lots of, I would say, cherished values of the mainstream about how right Israel is and how wrong the others are, that the peace movement at least put a question mark over this as if absolute truth. It is not that the entire peace movement is in an agreement about the causes of the conflict or how should it be dealt with, but the very questioning of the basic pillar of the consensus is something which is very upsetting and very irritating. We don't like these people who start questioning things that we do not question, because this brings us to a position of being reflexive, and a nation, particularly when they feel that they are under a threat. But although as I showed this afternoon some data that the sense of threat is not that terrible right now in Israel, but still the overall explanation is that the entire world is against us, and all Arabs would like to see Israel destroyed, and all Jews pushed to the Mediterranean. So the fact that there are people that will say, maybe we contributed here and there at least to the development of the conflict the way that it has developed, maybe we bear some of the responsibility, something that people do not want to listen, and certainly challenging the IDF or the army as the best assurance policy is something that is taken very badly by the mainstream of the Israeli society. The second answer is on a sociological level, and the answer here is related to the social or the social demographic and socio-economic composition of the movement. The Israeli peace movement is a classical, I would say, new social movement. It is composed of people of very specific socio-demographic and socio-economic profile. Almost 100% of them are urban, they are secular, they are middle class and above, they are well educated, they are better off financially, they live in the center of the country. Many of them have academic education. People who cannot relate or do not feel part of this elite group, they resent not only the people but also the message. So people of the periphery who do not enjoy all these options in life, who do not have such income, who do not have access or feel that they do not have access to all the goodies that these people enjoy, instead of developing, I would say, revolutionary mentality in terms of class struggle, what they do is target the political message of these people. And didn't we also know that some people of different socio-demographic character who wanted to take part in the activities of the peace movement, when they tried it, they felt that they are unwanted. And this was not done intentionally, of course. These are the subtleties, the social subtleties that make you feel at home in one social context, but make you feel very alienated and estranged in another context. And we have lots of evidences of people who are just making fun of the peace movement because of that, the way they dress, the way they behave, the language that they use. So it's a social issue that is turned into or appears as a political thing. And indeed, some people made the argument quite straightforward that as the peace movement members are part of the middle classes who are expected to benefit if peace prevails and the new Middle East will prevail, and they can export all their products to wherever, and they can use their better education and their economic abilities in order to flourish. They said that peace is not a national goal, but peace is a class interest. And therefore, they don't want to take part in it. I must say that reality, in a way, justify at least some of these arguments, because following the signing of the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, for example, certain factories were removed from Israel to Jordan because the labor costs there are much lower, and many people were sent home. So these people who were sent home because of the peace with Jordan wouldn't like to take the risk of having peace with the Palestinians and with the Lebanese and with the Syrians and maybe later on with the Iraqis and you name it. I mean, once you experience being sent home because your factory was removed from Israel to another place, then you wouldn't take the chances of having a new Middle East. I mean, maybe this would cause you even more devastation. So it is not totally groundless, but the numbers of people who were laid off because of that is very minimal. But it's enough in order to create some impression that these people are not really taking care of their own people, but all they worry about is about the suffering of the Arabs, and therefore they are being portrayed as Arab lovers, and particularly if these are women who are involved in that, and not only they do not understand military affairs and foreign affairs because they are women, but associating with the enemy is also something which is normally looked upon very, very badly by members of a society at war with another society. You surely know that this is a classical argument against women who socialize with the other side, which is a very, this comes from a very, I would say, atavistic sense of the we against the us, our women against their men, and this comes to the open when women peace groups protest in favor of ending the occupation. The remarks that are made against them are very different than the comments done by bypassers against male protesters. They would always talk about their sexuality, about being a prostitute that socialized with Arabs and so on and so forth. So the gender issue is also there because the peace movement has an unproportional representation of women in comparison to the general public in Israel. The last explanation, which the book deals in great length, is the issue of the peace movement being a social movement. And we know that social movement, with all their advantages, also have some disadvantages as political vehicles for encouraging some political changes. For example, they are very susceptible to what we call the structure of political opportunities in a given context. This notion has been developed in the context of social movement theories, and it relates to several aspects of the context in which social movements operate. It relates to the formal structure and the political system within the movement operates. It relates to the informal procedures, the prevailing strategies, and so on and so forth. In this context, we should look at the level of openness of the institutionalized political system, because a social movement can operate only in a situation where the institutionalized political system has some openings to this kind of activities. Certain political systems are totally closed to influences coming bottom up. This used to be the case in Israel in the late 40s and early 50s. We should also look at the level of the stability of the elite alignments, because if the elite is very coherent and the alignments are very stable, there are no openings for social activists to get into the decision makers. When the elite is made of one cloth, the ability of external activists or external organizations and actors to effect the decision-making process is much lower. There is also the question of allies within the elite, because if a social movement have or has some allies within the elite, it would be much easier for it to exert influence. And there is also the propensity of the government to use oppression. I mean, when the government is ready to use oppression, the ability of civil groups to exert influence is much lower, because they have to protect themselves from oppression. And the book deals very systematically with the various structure of political opportunities which the peace movement has faced throughout the years in Israel. Let me first tell you in this regard that the peace movement is not a movement. It is actually an artifact. We counted the numbers of the various peace organizations, and there is an appendix at the end of the book, and we came out with something like 167 or whatever groups throughout the years. I mean, some are already defunct, some are not, but the number is just amazing. The fact that you have so many organizations is very typical to this kind of activism, because people would split because they argue about the hour or the color of the furniture, or about very important ideological issues. So having so many groups is something which is very typical to this sort of political activism. But of course, this brings in its wake much wasting of resources, of financial resources, but also of attention and of human resources and so on and so forth. The groups are very different from each other ideologically, with the main rift here being between Zionist organizations and non-Zionist or even anti-Zionist organizations. The biggest ones are of course, Zionist. Shalom Achshav is the best example, which Anat mentioned, is of course the best example of the Zionist organizations. And on the one hand, this of course make it much easier for Zionist peace organizations to reach out to the wider public, but on the other hand, this actually makes it very, very difficult for them to be very critical or substantially critical of the causes of the conflict and the policies of the state. With the best examples of such situations is when a military operation starts. Because at that point, where you would expect peace activism to be in its peak, because, I mean, if war is being launched, then peace activists are expected to protest against the launching of the war. But if they are part of the mainstream Zionist ideology, they would not feel that it's very good for them, that it is the right thing for them to protest against the government or against their fellow men. Some of them are even being mobilized to the army, and they go and serve in the army. Some of the organizations are larger, some of them are smaller, some of them are more institutionalized, some of them are less institutionalized, some of them are mixed gendered, some of them are only women's organizations. There are no only male organizations, although in certain cases, like the letter that Anat mentioned that was sent to Prime Minister Begin before he went to Egypt, to Camp David in order to discuss the peace agreement with Egypt, only men were allowed to sign, which is quite paradoxical, because there were women officers in the army who wanted to sign this letter, but they were not they were not given the opportunity because they thought that it would bear more weight in the eyes of the decision makers and the public if they'll have they're only male officers in combat roles, whereas women are not normally in combat roles. But there are quite a number of women-only peace organizations. Also, of course, there are certain groups who endorse Marxist agendas. Some are socialists, but the variety is endless, and they multiply while you are counting them. So it's very, very difficult. Well, whenever we finished reading the galleys of the book, I mean, in each round we had another movement to add to the appendix until Cambridge said no more. I mean, you may have as many peace groups as you want, but please stop changing the manuscript all the time. Now, Anat mentioned that we do not recall peace activism until the late 70s. This is correct in terms of the national memory, but this is not historically correct, because we did have some kind of peace activism in the 50s. We had a very active branch of the international peace movement, which was sponsored from Moscow, for example. In 1951, they launched a petition against the atomic bombs, the Stockholm Appeal, and they collected in Israel several 100,000 signatures, but it is totally unknown. People do not know that it happened in Israel. In the 60s, we had several groups, particularly after the 67 war. The movement for peace and security was established in 1968. It defunct after the 1973 war, but they actually were the first to point to the dangers invested in the occupation. I mean, they were the first to warn that if Israel would institutionalize its control over the territories, then its democracy would be ruined from within. Very few people listened to them. Again, many of them were university professors or at the Weizmann Institute or scientists. But there were people who were active for peace. Of course, Peace Now in the late 70s was the most known one, the largest one. And in the eyes of many, when you say the peace movement, they say, well, Shalom Achshav. They are not familiar with any other movement. In the 80s, some more radical groups emerged after the launching of the Second Lebanon War, because for 10 days, Peace Now didn't do anything. So other movements took the lead of the peace activism in Israel. And certainly during the first Intifada of the late 80s, we had a plethora of groups and very intensive peace endeavors in Israel. They were all, of course, out of the mainstream, but their voice was very strongly heard. They got very good media coverage. They got good media coverage within Israel, but they got even better media coverage from the outside. And this, in a way, although, of course, it was very helpful in terms of fundraising and in terms of getting support from the outside, it also boomeranged later on, because it created an exaggerated impression of the ability of the movement to change realities. So people within Israel, and particularly people from outside Israel, have developed unrealistic expectations about the ability of the movement to really change the political or the policy-making processes. I mean, they were right about the ability to change the political climate of opinion, but they were wrong about assuming that the movement is so powerful then that it can really interfere in the decision-making process. And when the movement failed to do so, and of course it did fail to do so, because I mean, it was much weaker and much smaller and much more at the periphery than people got their ideas by the very positive media coverage, usually very positive media coverage. People got disappointed with that, and particularly it happened on the Palestinian side, because the Palestinians were, in a certain point in time, they were very hopeful that they found a very strong ally with the Israeli peace movement, and when the peace movement failed to stop the situation from deteriorating on the Israeli side, they have become so frustrated with the movement that they were the first to bash it, actually. And it was just unbelievable when you looked into the publications and the blogs and the internet sites of the Palestinian side. The main enemy there is the Israeli peace movement. It is just unbelievable that the only people who are listening to them, I mean, when you read their stuff, then it seems as if the peace movement launched the military operations against them because it was not successful in stopping it. So in a certain point in time, what happened was that the Palestinians totally turned their back on the peace movement, and they actually started to say that it is better to try and create alliances with the people on the right and those who are the hardliners in Israel, because they are the only ones that will be capable of delivering the goods. So the dynamic here was very, of course, devastating from the point of view of the peace activists, because their allies on the alleged allies on the other side were not interested anymore in cooperating with them, and they were the first to actually turn a cold shoulder on them, and therefore when they were asked, okay, so who is your partner on the other side, they couldn't say anything, because they didn't have anyone on the Palestinian side who was ready to step forward and say, okay, I'm the counterpart of the peace activism in Israel. So what happened in the 90s, and this is very interesting in terms of analyzing the dynamics of the relations between social movements and government. When the peace accord was signed in the summer of 1993, actually the rationale for the existence of the peace movement totally collapsed. Because people said, okay, now it's the government which is making peace. Why do we need the peace movement? So the movement was demobilized from within. Many people who devoted lots of time and lots of energies and lots of resources just went home and started to do their own thing instead of doing peace activism, because it's the government now who is in charge of making peace. Second, what happened was that the government did not give any credit to the peace movement, although many of the items which appear in the Oslo Accords and the other accords which were signed later on were actually taken almost word by word from the platform of the peace movement. In other words, its agenda was hijacked by the government, but the government has never credited it. No credit was given to the movement. Just an anecdote, in all the ceremonies in which various agreements were signed, and many people were invited by the decision makers to come along, bereaved parents, ex-generals, people who did that, people who did some other things. Not even one peace activist was invited to join any of the prime minister or any of the ministers to any of the ceremonies that were held in the early to the mid-90s. And this was very, very significant, because it got nothing as a thank you by anyone. In fact, the government, particularly the governments under the Labour Party, worked very hard to disassociate themselves from the peace movement, because they didn't want to get stigmatized by being too close to the movement. But from the organizational point of view, this is catastrophic, because an organization who was always denounced by everyone, and now its agenda is being adopted by the government, they need to get some recognition of the contribution. And if they get nothing, but they are also only pushed aside, then the morale of the people just is being critically eroded. And people really left in hundreds and in thousands, and there was no public support base anymore, particularly, and this is even more important, than that very close to the signing of these agreements, some people started to warn that the government is not going in the right direction. Although they are pursuing the cause of peace, they are not actually doing the right thing in order to change reality the way that the peace movement thought that it should be done. However, when they wanted to take some steps in order to expose these realities, their fellow men within the movement said that they shouldn't criticize the government from the outside because the right is criticizing the government, so we shouldn't really contribute by criticizing the government from the other side, politically speaking. So what happened was that quite often the Rabin's government and the Peres government later on after Rabin was assassinated did took some moves which were clearly counterproductive, and even the peace activists who realized that at the time found it very difficult for tactical reasons to protest against the government. So there were no peace rallies organized against the government. Nothing was written. Very few things were said in public. So in a way, they saw that the train was not going on the right way, but they thought that they should keep quiet. This, of course, created some internal tensions within the movement between those who said that the fact that we are close to the government, ideologically speaking, doesn't mean that we should keep our mouths shut, and the others who thought, and these were the stronger voices, that they should side with the government. Certainly, the assassination of Rabin in 1995 was a huge blow, although you should know that Rabin disliked the peace movement, and I think that the only things that bothers him in his grave is the fact that he became the martyr of the peace movement, because he really didn't want to do anything with them. Actually, at the very peace rally, at the aftermath of which he was assassinated, there was a very heated debate going on the stage where he stood, because he insisted that the peace movement would not raise their banners while he was talking, because he didn't want to be reminded of the criticism of his policy, and he didn't want to see them there. His son later on, when he was interviewed, his son later on headed a quasi peace organization. When he was interviewed years later afterwards and was asked what did he think about the peace movement, he said, "They made the life of my father miserable." I mean, others killed him, but they made his life hell. So this situation was always there, because no one actually praised the peace movement in any way. So when Likud came back to power in 1996, the movement felt a bit better about protesting against the government, because it was another party of the right. And then people started to say, okay, what you do, you are actually hypocritical, because some very unpleasant things happened under Labor and you didn't do anything. And now that Likud is back in power, you have started all the peace protests once again, which means that what motivates you is not actually what happens, but what you think about the government in power, and this also helped to erode their image with the wider public. And indeed it happened again when Barak took over in 1999. Again, the peace movement stopped protesting against the government. Although the relations between Barak and the movement was, the relationship were not that good at any point of time. When he came back from the failed second Camp David summit, one of the things that he said to the journalist on, while still in the air, is that he is going to crush the peace movement. I mean, why? The peace movement was not active at that time against him, but he felt that while he was about to launch his no partner spin and convince the Israeli public that there is no one on the other side to talk peace with. The fact that the peace movement was saying otherwise, this might have disturbed him politically. So his first target was the peace movement instead of all other bodies in the political arena. The eruption of the second Intifada was very, very devastating for the peace movement, which was already small and weak and very distressed. And what happened there was that many people, I mean, there were not so many people to be able to live it because there were no longer so many people in the movement. But those who stayed with the movement have dramatically radicalized their views about the conflict and about Israel, and were very critical of Israel. And this, of course, also damaged the image, because while everyone was concerned with terrorism and so on and so forth, these people, as if put at least part of the responsibility on Israel's shoulders. So their ability to communicate with the public in general shrank even more. So the question is, I mean, and indeed ever since then, the movement was unable to get back to life. They avoid organizing large peace rallies because they don't know if people will show, will come and take part, and therefore they do not do it. They are very active on the internet. I mean, if you just count the mailing lists and the blogs and the websites, you could think that it's a very prosperous movement. Don't be misled by that. The number of people is very small, and there is, of course, overlapping membership, because the same people are members of various organizations. Now, the last thing that I would like to do is to present you with a balance sheet and try to figure out, is it a failure or isn't it a failure? And of course, the answer is that there is no definite answer to that, although the person in the street or the average person in the street would tell you that it's a complete failure, but it isn't. So let's think about the weaker points. The weaker points are more visible. Its ability to effect the national policy has proven very minimal throughout the years. I mean, the ability to say they prevented this or they encouraged that is very minimal. The causality thing is very difficult to establish here, and apparently, besides very few situations, there is no correlation between the activities and the policy product, which can be pointed to. Establishing facts on the ground is also something which is very critical, whereas the activists on the right could always say, we created the entire settlement project, we have towns and cities and villages and outposts, legal outposts and illegal outposts, you name it. The peace movement, by its nature, is not aiming at creating facts on the ground, but in Israel, which is based on the pioneering vision that you do things by doing things, actually. Talking about changing the discourse is not something that people think as just creating facts on the ground. So people see it as a very weak point in the peace movement achievements. Reaching out to the Israeli Jewish public, as I said, the movement has been at odds with large sections of the Israeli Jewish public, and even more so with the Israeli Arab public. And this is a very interesting fact, because one would have expected the peace movement to reach out to the Israeli Arabs or Palestinians and to create alliances with them. But they wouldn't do that, because if they were too closely connected with the Arabs, then the Jews would not come on board. So they actually have made, in many cases, strategic decisions not to associate themselves with the Arabs. So, and particularly those movements who were Zionists could not find any common ground with the Arabs. And therefore, this, on that point, this is also not a great achievement. I already mentioned the problems in the relations with the Palestinians, who actually argued that they cannot speak on equal footing with the peace movement because they belong to the occupying force and they are the occupied. So even if they mean well, they are no partners for a real dialogue because of the power differences between the two groups. Intra-movement relations, although there were no confrontational relations almost within the movement, the ability to create coalitions was not highly developed. It developed later on in the years 2000 onward, but they invested, I mean, various movements invested lots of resources in redundant activities that could have be much more effective and much less resource consuming, where they cooperating and not insisting on having it their own way. Relations with the establishment, certainly they failed in finding allies within the political establishment. However, what about the positive signs? As I said, the movement, in my view, and I try to show it in the book, was quite successful in changing the public discourse, in introducing new notions like the two-state solution, which I already mentioned in my earlier presentation here. The notion of occupation. I mean, it was only the peace movement who talked about occupation. This is a word that was totally missing in the vocabulary of Israelis when they spoke about the situation. The Nakba, which is the disaster of the Palestinians in 1948, they actually reshaped the way that Israelis talk about the conflict. Even if they disagree with them, then the vocabulary was enriched, and the way of looking at things, instead of a zero-sum game, the ability to see it as a mixed motive game. This is obviously the handmaking of the peace movement at large, without referring to a specific movement. Certainly, it increased the level of pluralism within Israel. I mean, more voices were heard in Israel. I mean, this unified chorus of everyone singing the same song was interfered by the fact that the peace movement sang another song. And this contributed not only to the issue of peace and war, but it enriched tremendously the Israeli democracy as such. It also contributed to the image of Israel from the outside. I mean, the fact that people from the outside can say, hey, not all Israelis are supportive of the occupation. Not everyone is pro-settlement. There are many people there who oppose the government, many people who challenge the justification for a certain military operation and so on. So and it changed the view of Israel from the outside. And last but not least, the peace movement magnified certain silent voices within Israel, in particular the voices of women. Because in other contexts, the voice of women, as far as foreign and security matters are concerned, was hardly heard. And this was actually their contribution to the making of feminist views of the conflict, and just having women expressing views in public as women is something which is very critical to the political debate in Israel. So I thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions if you're not too depressed.
I was curious as to where, like, what is the future outlook of the peace activists in Israel in terms of, like, are we still advocating for a two-state solution, or what are we looking to accomplish, or what are they looking to accomplish?
Well, being socialized as a political scientist, I don't do prophecies. I mean, it's unprofessional. By and large, the mainstream and the mainstream of the peace movement is still advocating the two-state solution. However, at the periphery of the peace movement, more and more voices are heard that this solution is outdated because it could have been achieved maybe 10 years ago, but it cannot be achieved as of today. They are talking about a binational solution or other solutions. As of today, these alternative solutions are really advocated only in the far periphery. I mean, the numbers of people within Israel, both at the public level, let alone at the level of the decision makers who are supportive of any other solution, is very tiny. So I cannot, I mean, of course you can say the way that the two-state solution was at the periphery and it moved from the periphery to the center, then we can also assume that the same dynamics would hold for the binational solution, for example. But I think that historical analogies are very dangerous to make because it touches upon the nature of the state, whereas the two-state solution was fed in a way by the desire of the Israeli Jews to see a purely Jewish state, and this is why they supported the two-state solution, not because they were so supportive of the right of the Palestinians for self-determination, but because they wanted to maintain Israel as a Jewish state. The binational solution actually is very antithetical from that point of view, and therefore I do not foresee it as becoming the mainstream idea of how to resolve the conflict.
I've only recently started to learn a little bit more, or hear a little bit more about the boycott, divestments, and sanctions movement. I'm kind of curious as to what you think. Is this something that's largely taking place outside of Israel, or is the Israeli peace movement, is this in some senses their, I don't know, desperate attempt to start working from outside the state, since they're kind of collapsed within.
Well, quite frankly, the majority within the peace movement is strongly against the sanctions and the boycotts. Very few people are openly supportive of such a move taken from the outside. I mean, it's individuals who may say so, but I haven't heard of even. I mean, there is one group which is supportive of boycotting products from the settlements, which is something different. I think that more people in Israel would be supportive of that. For example, I can think of my friends. They wouldn't buy wines that were produced in the occupied territories. But not more than that. Talking about real sanctions and boycott is being perceived now as something that a decent Israeli would never support. Actually, it is being used against the peace movement, because every time an individual who is associated in the public's mind with the peace movement is saying something for boycotting or sanctioning Israel, immediately it is being used against the movement in general, and it's a very powerful argument against it. So I don't see it as a tactics or a strategy which is used by the movement at large. Only individuals here and there. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone is in support for that. Yeah.
Does that cause a further backlash?
Well, the situation is so dismal that it's microscopic. You see, I mean, it is so well known that the peace movement is against the settlements for so many years, that this would not push things into the negative direction. Because if you would ask the average Israeli, what is the main theme of the peace movement, they would tell you they are against the settlements. So.
Well, can I just continue that? It's one thing to be supportive of a freeze, but when you ask, is the peace movement all univocally for dismantling settlements?
That's a bit more.
And all settlements, then you get a different thing.
Yeah, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
Because certain more mainstream groups would, for example, allow for the large settlement blocks to be negotiated with the Palestinians, with a variety of techniques of swapping lands and so on and so forth. But freezing is something that would be, I think, be supported by every faction of the peace movement.
I'm curious to know your opinion on the effect of the sort of proliferation of the international human rights movement on the peace movement in Israel, whether that movement, now that it's become so globalized, whether it's impacted the strategies of the peace movement, whether it's impacted the vocabulary even, made the movement more relevant, given it a sort of revalidation?
Well, this is a question that has bothered the peace movement throughout the years. To which extent can they allow themselves to associate themselves with activism which is conducted elsewhere without losing their quote-unquote patriotic nature? And many of the groups have avoided having close connections with groups and activists from the outside. If we take, for example, the International Solidarity Movement, whose members are coming over to the West Bank and in the past to Gaza in order to help the Palestinians in their struggle against Israelis and doing some humanitarian work there. Most Israeli peace groups would not cooperate with them because they didn't want to be associated with them. Obviously, as I said at the beginning, these the people who are active in the peace movement are people who travel a lot, who go abroad, who get to know people. So obviously, there is some spillover of the rhetoric and the notions and so on. But institutionally, they would be very careful about associating themselves with external bodies, and particularly with non-Jewish bodies. I mean, they might have the American Friends of Peace Now and other Jewish organizations, even if they are radical, as long as they are Jewish, that's Berber. But if they are not only critical of Israel, but also non-Jewish, then it's the end of the world.
Yes.
I've heard that there's been a lot of talk about the Israeli government launching attacks on Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities, so to preemptively prevent them from possibly attacking Israel. Do you think that that would be justified in terms of the peace movement? Do you think that they could see that as justified, seeing that a nuclear attack could be?
I can only tell you that I haven't seen even one ad or one act done by the peace movement in this regard. I mean, this is something, this is mega politics, you see? And I don't think that you'll find a consensus within the peace movement about doing or not doing that. I mean, the word is in the air there that there are some plans, and of course it changes by the day depending on what does the international community say at any given point in time. What are the positions of the American administration there? But we did have in the past one experience in doing something like that in Iraq. 1981, correct? And if it would be successful, and there was a second time very recently done in Syria, which was very successful in terms of not being able to say what they did there, who did that, and so on and so forth. So I suppose that if someone would come up with a plan that would enable Israel to do it without bearing any consequences, then everyone would tell you, okay, that's the right way to go. But then the consequences might be horrible if they will really launch some missiles attack on Israel. So people are not that confident that it could be done. The question is, can it be performed strategically in a surgical way that would not bear consequences to Israel? If someone could have promised that it can be done that way, I suppose that the vast majority in Israel would be supportive of that.
It seems that Israel is actually doing very well economically these days.
Not bad, thank you.
Right. And it seems to me that, they managed actually to marginalize the Palestinians also in terms of being the workmen who would come to Israel, main part of Israel and so on and so forth. Do you think that that has also some influence on the sort of demise of the peace movement, in a sense that, with the prosperity comes less interest and so on?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, when the situation is stable economically, then people are less desperate to find a way out. But one of the failures, I suppose, of the peace movement is to make clearer the connection between the continuation of the occupation and the standards of living in Israel. I mean, it was very unsuccessful in transmitting this message to the people. So people, although, I mean, it was debated a lot by the peace movement. The fact that instead of investing in education and in health, they build all these roads in the occupied territories, and the costs of the occupation, having a very large military and so on and so forth. But it didn't catch the minds and the hearts of the average Israeli. As about to the disappearing of the Palestinians, obviously what happened was that once the Palestinians were prohibited from entering Israel, their presence has become much vaguer, much more vague for most Israelis. They do not see Palestinians, they do not meet Palestinians, they do not have to relate to the sufferings of the Palestinians. The media doesn't cover it very extensively. So this is something that happens very far away, and as long as buses do not explode, they can live with it. The interesting thing is that foreign workers, of course, were let into Israel. We have Filipinos and Thais and Romanians and people from wherever, including people from Africa. And that's very interesting because the people who came from Africa and stayed in Israel, some are illegal, some are illegal, they developed their own churches in Israel, and these churches are mostly Pentecostal churches, and the views of these people are strongly anti-Palestinian. Because, I mean, of course, they attribute it to the Bible and the fact that God promised the land to the Jews. But the fact of the matter is that if the Palestinians would come back, they would be kicked out. So here again, the class interest plays a role in the development of people's perceptions and attitudes. Okay?
We almost have to finish. I'd like to take a little bit of the chair to ask you a tiny question, which is gigantic, but it goes back to your thesis about the success of the movement having been in changing the discourse. I just want to ask you if you think changing the discourse counts for anything. The fact that people say Palestinian state, two-state solution, the fact that people say all these things, but the occupation is continuing, and in fact people vote, at least according to our voting behavior, what we're seeing is that they want to continue with the occupation. Does talking about it make it any better?
Well, I tend to say yes. Okay. Because the very fact that they are talking about an occupation is in a sense, much better than when they could totally ignore the fact that there is an occupation. I mean, that's the entire idea of framing. Once you frame it as an occupation, you have to deal with the consequences of being an occupier. And even if you decide, if you say, I think it's important.